A Millionaire's Secret, Malachi's Journey of Courage and Redemption. In the bustling streets of Chicago, where the line between survival and despair is razor thin, Malachi, a 14-year-old orphan, struggles to make ends meet. Living with his ailing grandfather, his days revolve around scavenging for scraps, barely scraping enough to afford medicine. But his life takes an unexpected turn when an act of bravery thrusts him into the world of Margaret, an enigmatic millionaire. Beneath the facade of wealth and generosity lies a brewing conflict, as Margaret's son, Gregory, hides a web of deceit. Can a boy from the streets uncover the truth and protect what's right? This gripping tale of courage and morality invites you to explore a battle where justice faces greed. The city of Chicago hummed with life, a symphony of honking cars, hurried footsteps, and the distant wail of sirens. Amid the towering skyscrapers and bustling crowds, there lay a forgotten corner of the city, a neighborhood where broken windows and cracked sidewalks told stories of hardship. It was here that Malachi, a boy of 14, lived with his frail grandfather in a cramped, dimly lit apartment. The smell of mildew clung to the peeling walls, and the faint whistle of the wind sneaking through the gaps in the windows became their nightly lullaby. Malachi was small for his age, with a wiry frame that spoke of too many skipped meals. His dark, curly hair often fell into his sharp, determined eyes, a feature that made him seem older than his years. Each day, he set out with a rusty cart, scouring alleyways and trash bins for cans and bottles to sell. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep his grandfather's medication within reach. On this particular morning, the air was brisk, and the city seemed unusually restless. As Malachi wheeled his cart through the narrow streets, his breath visible in the cold air, he felt the familiar weight of exhaustion. But he pushed on, determined to fill his cart and earn enough for the day. "Hey, trash boy!" A jeering voice shattered his focus. He turned to see a group of older boys, their faces smeared with a mix of mischief and malice. They blocked the alleyway, their laughter echoing against the walls. Malachi's heart sank. He knew these boys well, bullies who thrived on tormenting the vulnerable. "Leave me alone," he muttered, gripping the handle of his cart tightly. "Oh, we're just here to help you lighten your load," sneered the leader, a tall boy with a jagged scar across his cheek. Without waiting for a response, they lunged forward, overturning Malachi's cart. Cans and bottles clattered noisily to the ground, rolling into the gutter. "Stop it!" Malachi shouted, his voice trembling with anger and desperation. He tried to gather his scattered collection, but one of the boys shoved him to the ground. The rough pavement scraped his palms, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thanks for the donation," the scarred boy taunted, grabbing a sack of cans before the group sauntered off, their laughter fading into the distance. Malachi sat there for a moment, the cold seeping into his skin. His chest ached, not from the fall, but from the humiliation and the weight of helplessness. He wanted to fight back, but what could a scrawny kid like him do against them? With trembling hands, he began picking up what little remained of his collection. As he stood to leave, his gaze fell upon an elderly woman struggling to cross the busy street nearby. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on a cane, her frail figure dwarfed by the speeding cars. Suddenly, her foot caught on the curb, and she stumbled, falling to her knees. Malachi's eyes widened as he saw a delivery truck barreling down the street, its driver oblivious to the woman in its path. Without thinking, he bolted forward, his legs pumping as adrenaline surged through his veins. "Watch out," he screamed, his voice cutting through the cacophony of the street. The woman turned her head, fear etched across her wrinkled face, but it was clear she couldn't move in time. Malachi reached her just as the truck's brakes screeched. With all his strength, he yanked her out of the way, both of them tumbling onto the sidewalk as the truck roared past, missing them by mere inches. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Malachi asked, his chest heaving as he helped her sit up. His hands were scraped and bloody, but he barely noticed. The woman looked at him, her watery blue eyes wide with disbelief. You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't even know your name." "It's Malachi," he said simply, brushing dirt off his worn hoodie. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, a small, grateful smile spreading across her face. "No, thanks to you. You're a brave young man." Malachi helped her to her feet, noticing for the first time her elegant yet weathered appearance. Her coat, though finely tailored, was faded, and her cane was carved with intricate designs that hinted at a life once filled with grandeur. "What were you doing out here alone?" Malachi asked, concern lacing his voice. "I was heading to the bus stop," she explained. "My name is Margaret, by the way." "Well, Margaret, let me walk you there," he offered, glancing nervously at the street as if expecting danger to strike again. As they walked, Margaret studied Malachi with quiet curiosity. His clothes were patched and too thin for the cold, and his shoes had clearly seen better days. Yet there was a resilience in his posture, a fire in his eyes that intrigued her. When they reached the bus stop, Margaret turned to him. "Malachi, I owe you my life. Please, let me repay your kindness. Meet me tomorrow morning at this address." She handed him a neatly folded piece of paper. Malachi hesitated, staring at the address scribbled in elegant handwriting. It was in a part of town he had never dared to venture, a place where the wealthy lived in sprawling mansions behind tall gates. "I'm not sure if I can," he began, but Margaret interrupted him, her tone firm yet kind. "Promise me you'll come. You've done something extraordinary today, and I won't take no for an answer." Seeing the earnestness in her eyes, Malachi finally nodded. "All right, I'll be there." As she boarded the bus and disappeared into the city, Malachi stood alone at the stop, clutching the paper tightly. The day's hardships still weighed heavily on him, but for the first time in a long while, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Little did he know, this encounter would change his life forever. The following morning, the air was crisp and clear, the sunlight casting a golden hue over the city. Malachi stood at the base of an imposing wrought iron gate, clutching the piece of paper Margaret had given him. Beyond the gate, a sprawling estate stretched out, a lush garden with neatly trimmed hedges, a fountain bubbling in the center, and a grand mansion that seemed to belong to another world. It was a far cry from the crumbling apartment complex he called home. He shifted uncomfortably, pulling his threadbare hoodie tighter against the chill. The gate buzzed and swung open, startling him. A uniformed man emerged from a small security booth, giving him a once-over. "You must be Malachi," the guard said, his tone polite but cautious. "Mrs. Margaret is expecting you." Malachi nodded and stepped inside, feeling as though he were walking into a dream. The gravel crunched beneath his worn sneakers as he approached the mansion. Every step made him more aware of the contrast between this world and his own. The front door opened before he could knock, revealing Margaret, now dressed in a soft lavender sweater and pearl earrings. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Malachi. I'm so glad you came," she greeted warmly, ushering him inside. "Please, make yourself at home." The interior of the mansion was even more breathtaking. The high ceilings were adorned with crystal chandeliers, and sunlight streamed through large windows draped with velvet curtains. The walls were lined with paintings, their ornate frames gleaming in the light. "Wow," Malachi whispered, his eyes wide. "This place is huge." Margaret chuckled. "It's been in my family for generations, though it's far too big for just me now." She led him into a cozy sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. "Would you like some tea? Or maybe hot chocolate?" "Hot chocolate, please," Malachi said, his voice soft. He perched on the edge of a plush armchair, unsure if he should let himself sink into its comfort. Margaret disappeared briefly and returned with a steaming mug. As Malachi sipped, the rich, creamy flavor made him sigh contentedly. For a moment, the warmth chased away the weight of his daily struggles. "Malachi," Margaret began, settling into a chair across from him, "I want to help you. Yesterday, you risked your life for me without hesitation. That kind of courage is rare. He set the mug down, his expression cautious. "Help me?" "How?" "I've been blessed with more than I could ever need," she explained. "My late husband and I started a charitable foundation, and my son Gregory runs it now. Through the foundation, we've helped many young people like you get back on their feet. I want to do the same for you." Malachi frowned slightly. The idea of someone wanting to help him felt foreign. "Why me? I'm just a kid who picks up bottles and cans." Margaret leaned forward, her gaze gentle but firm. "Because I see potential in you. You're smart, resourceful, and brave. With a little support, I believe you could achieve great things." Before Malachi could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A tall, sharply dressed man entered the room. His suit was immaculate, and his hair was slicked back with precision. His sharp features carried a coldness that immediately set Malachi on edge. "Mother," the man said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth, "you didn't tell me we were expecting a guest." "Gregory," Margaret said with a smile, "this is Malachi, the young man I told you about. He saved my life yesterday." Gregory's piercing blue eyes swept over Malachi, assessing him like a commodity. "I see," he said flatly. "Well, that was very noble of him." Malachi shifted uncomfortably under Gregory's gaze. There was something about the man that felt disingenuous, as though every word he spoke carried a hidden agenda. "I was just telling Malachi about our foundation," Margaret continued. "I thought we could offer him some support." Gregory's lips curled into a tight smile. "Of course, if that's what you want, Mother. But first, perhaps we should see what he's capable of." Margaret's brow furrowed. "Gregory, this isn't a test." "Nonsense," Gregory interrupted smoothly. "It's simply a way to ensure we're helping someone who truly deserves it." Malachi's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way Gregory spoke, as though he were nothing more than a charity case. But he also didn't want to disappoint Margaret, who had shown him nothing but kindness. "What kind of test?" Malachi asked, his voice steady despite his unease. Gregory's smile widened slightly. "A simple task. There's a package that needs delivering to one of our partners. It's a straightforward job, but it will show us your reliability." Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but Malachi spoke first. "I'll do it." Margaret hesitated, then sighed. "If you're sure, Malachi. But you don't have to prove anything to me." "I want to," he replied, meeting her gaze. "You've done so much for me already." Gregory clapped his hands once, the sound sharp and final. "Excellent. The details will be given to you shortly. Don't worry, it's nothing too difficult." As Gregory left the room, Malachi turned back to Margaret. "Is he always like that?" Margaret chuckled softly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Gregory is practical. He runs the foundation efficiently, but sometimes he forgets to lead with his heart." Malachi nodded, though his gut told him there was more to Gregory than met the eye. Still, he pushed the thought aside. For now, he had a job to do. That afternoon, Malachi found himself navigating the busy streets of Chicago once more, this time with a small, nondescript package tucked under his arm. The address Gregory had given him was in a part of town he rarely ventured into, a mix of industrial buildings and shadowed alleys. The journey was uneventful at first, but as he neared his destination, a familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. "Well, look who it is." The scarred boy from the day before stepped out of an alley, flanked by his gang. "What's in the box, trash boy?" "None of your business," Malachi said firmly, his heart pounding. "Looks important," the boy sneered, stepping closer. "Hand it over." Malachi's grip tightened on the package. "No." The boy lunged, but Malachi was quicker. He darted past them, his legs burning as he sprinted down the street. The gang gave chase, their shouts echoing behind him. Malachi ducked into an alley, weaving through dumpsters and crates. He knew this part of the city well and used every shortcut he could remember. Finally, he burst out onto a main road, glancing back to see the gang had given up. His chest heaved as he caught his breath. The package was still clutched tightly in his hands. When he delivered it moments later, the recipient, a stern-looking woman, nodded in approval. "Good work," she said, handing him a signed receipt. "You've got guts, kid." Malachi returned to the mansion that evening, exhausted but triumphant. Margaret greeted him with a warm smile, while Gregory's expression remained unreadable. "Well done," Gregory said, his voice as cold as ever. "Perhaps you're more capable than I thought." As Malachi sat down for dinner with Margaret, he couldn't shake the feeling that Gregory's words were less a compliment and more a veiled challenge. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences for Malachi. Margaret had insisted he stay at the mansion temporarily to ensure he was safe from the bullies in his neighborhood. For the first time in years, he slept on a proper bed, ate hot meals, and felt a glimmer of hope for something more. However, the lingering presence of Gregory cast a shadow over the warmth Margaret provided. Gregory treated Malachi with a mix of condescension and suspicion. Each interaction felt like an interrogation, as though Gregory was searching for a reason to deem Malachi unworthy of Margaret's trust. Despite this, Malachi resolved to keep his head down and prove himself. One quiet evening, Malachi wandered the halls of the mansion, marveling at the art and decor. He paused before a large family portrait. Margaret stood at the center, younger but still radiating the same gentle warmth. Beside her was a man Malachi assumed to be her late husband, a kind-looking figure with salt and pepper hair. Gregory stood stiffly to the side, his expression colder than the others. Even in the painting, his distance was palpable. As Malachi studied the painting, a voice startled him. Admiring the family history? He turned to see Nathan, Gregory's assistant, standing in the doorway. Nathan was in his 30s, with a disheveled yet approachable appearance. His dark eyes were sharp but carried a hint of weariness, as though he had seen too much in his role. "Yeah," Malachi replied, stepping back. "It's impressive." Nathan smirked faintly. "Impressive, sure. But every family has its cracks, even the ones with walls this high." Malachi tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Nathan hesitated, glancing down the hall before lowering his voice. "Let's just say Gregory has his own way of doing things. Not everyone agrees with it." The cryptic comment lingered in Malachi's mind as he continued exploring. His curiosity about Gregory grew, fueled by the unease he felt every time they interacted. A few days later, Malachi was tasked with delivering another package. Gregory handed it to him personally, his expression unreadable. "This is an important delivery," he said. "Don't open it, don't ask questions. Just get it done." Malachi nodded, though the command sat uneasily with him. The package was heavier than the last, wrapped in plain brown paper. As he made his way through the city, a sense of foreboding crept over him. The address led him to a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. Malachi hesitated at the door, his instincts screaming that something was off. He knocked, and a gruff man with a scarred face opened the door, his eyes narrowing. "You're late," the man growled, snatching the package from Malachi's hands. Without another word, the door slammed shut. Malachi lingered outside, his curiosity overpowering his fear. Through a grimy window, he saw the man open the package, revealing stacks of cash and a small ledger. The man's expression darkened as he flipped through the pages, his mouth moving as though he were calculating something. "What's going on?" Malachi muttered to himself. His heart raced as he backed away from the warehouse. He had delivered the package, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he was involved in something far bigger than he understood. That night, unable to sleep, Malachi decided to search for answers. He crept down to Gregory's office, the one room in the mansion that always seemed locked. To his surprise, the door was ajar. Inside, the room was meticulously organized, with shelves of books and neatly arranged files. A large desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers. Malachi's eyes fell on a folder labeled Donor Accounts. The temptation was too great to resist. He opened it, his hands trembling. Inside were detailed records of the foundation's finances, but something didn't add up. Large sums of money were being funneled into accounts under different names, all traced back to Gregory. "What are you doing here?" a voice hissed. Malachi whirled around to see Nathan standing in the doorway. His face was a mixture of anger and concern. I was just," Malachi stammered, clutching the folder. Nathan closed the door behind him and crossed the room quickly. "You shouldn't be snooping. Gregory doesn't take kindly to questions." "But this," Malachi held up the folder. "This looks wrong. He's stealing from the foundation, isn't he?" Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Malachi thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a sigh, Nathan leaned against the desk. "You're not wrong. Gregory has been funneling money into offshore accounts for years. He's planning to declare Margaret unfit to manage her estate and take control of everything." Malachi's stomach turned. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? "Because Gregory is smart," Nathan said bitterly. "He knows how to cover his tracks. And anyone who gets in his way, well, let's just say they regret it." Malachi's mind raced. The kind woman who had taken him in was being manipulated by her own son. "I can't let him get away with this," he said firmly. Nathan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you're serious about stopping him, you'll need proof. And you'll need someone Margaret trusts to back you up." "Elena," Malachi said immediately. The loyal housekeeper had been with Margaret for decades and often spoke her mind about Gregory. "Good choice," Nathan agreed. "But be careful. Gregory's not just going to sit back and let you ruin his plans." The next morning, Malachi confided in Elena. Her stern face softened as he explained what he had discovered. "I've suspected for years," she admitted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "But I never had the courage to confront him. If what you're saying is true, we need to act quickly." Together, they devised a plan. Nathan would gather more concrete evidence, while Malachi and Elena would find a way to present it to Margaret without tipping Gregory off. As the pieces of their plan came together, Malachi felt a newfound sense of purpose. He wasn't just a boy from the streets anymore, he was someone fighting for what was right. But he also knew the risks were higher than ever. In the shadows of the grand mansion, Gregory was watching. And he wasn't about to let a boy like Malachi unravel everything he had built. The tension in the mansion grew heavier with each passing day. Gregory, sharp-eyed and always a step ahead, seemed to sense that something was amiss. He kept a closer watch on Malachi, his icy stares lingering just a little too long, his seemingly polite questions dripping with suspicion. Malachi, for his part, tried to act natural, though his heart pounded every time their paths crossed. One evening, as a pale moonlight spilled through the mansion's tall windows, Malachi sat with Elena and Nathan in the kitchen. A soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a fragile cover for their whispered conversation. "We've got enough to prove he's stealing," Nathan said, placing a USB drive on the table. "These are detailed financial records linking Gregory to offshore accounts and fraudulent transfers." Elena nodded grimly. "But presenting this to Margaret won't be easy. Gregory will fight tooth and nail to discredit it." Malachi clenched his fists. "We have to do it. She deserves to know the truth." The following morning, Margaret invited the household to a brunch in the garden, a rare occasion she insisted upon to brighten the week. The sprawling garden, with its vibrant flowers and neatly trimmed hedges, seemed like a scene from a painting. A long table covered in white linen was set with delicate porcelain dishes, steaming pots of tea, and fresh fruit. Malachi sat quietly, feeling out of place among the splendor. Across the table, Gregory's presence loomed large, his calculated charm filling every corner of the conversation. He laughed at Margaret's anecdotes and complimented her taste, but his smiles never reached his eyes. "Malachi," Gregory said suddenly, his tone almost playful, "how are you finding life here? Quite an upgrade from the streets, I imagine." Margaret shot Gregory a reproachful look. "Gregory, that's unnecessary." Malachi, though startled, met Gregory's gaze. "It's different, sure. But I've learned that some things don't change no matter where you are." Gregory's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. Wise words for someone so young. As the brunch continued, Malachi caught Elena's eye. She gave a subtle nod, the signal. It was time. "Mrs. Margaret," Malachi began hesitantly, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "There's something important I need to tell you." Margaret looked up, her expression warm but curious. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Malachi's throat tightened. He glanced at Nathan and Elena for reassurance before continuing. "It's about Gregory. There are things you need to know about how he's been managing the foundation." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Gregory's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, piercing glare. "What nonsense is this?" he snapped. Malachi stood his ground. "It's not nonsense. He's been stealing from the foundation, funneling money into private accounts and planning to take over your estate." "Ridiculous!" Gregory barked, rising from his chair. "Mother, you can't seriously believe this boy's lies." Margaret, though visibly shaken, held up a hand. "Gregory, sit down." "Malachi, do you have proof?" Nathan stepped forward, placing the USB drive on the table. "This contains detailed financial records, Mrs. Margaret. Transactions, account details, it's all there." Gregory's face turned red with fury. "You little traitor," he hissed at Nathan. "You're fired." Nathan met his glare with calm defiance. "I'm not the one who betrayed her trust." Margaret picked up the USB drive, her hands trembling. "Gregory, is this true?" "Mother," Gregory began, his voice softening, "you know I've always had your best interests at heart. This is a misunderstanding. A manipulation by these people to turn you against me." Elena spoke up, her voice steady. "Mrs. Margaret, you've known me for decades. You know I wouldn't say this unless I believed it to be true. Please, look at the evidence." Margaret hesitated, torn between the son she had loved and the mounting accusations against him. Finally, she rose, her voice quivering but firm. "We'll review this together. Gregory, if you have nothing to hide, you'll have nothing to fear." That evening, the mansion was heavy with silence. Margaret, Elena, and Malachi reviewed the files in Margaret's private study. The damning evidence was irrefutable. Transactions clearly showed money being funneled into accounts under Gregory's control. By the time they finished, Margaret's face was pale, her eyes brimming with tears. "How could he do this?" she whispered. "My own son." Malachi placed a hand on her arm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Margaret. But you deserve to know the truth." She nodded, her sadness hardening into resolve. "This ends now." The confrontation came the next morning in the grand dining room. Gregory strode in confidently, as though he still controlled the narrative. Margaret was waiting, flanked by Malachi, Elena, and Nathan. "Mother," Gregory began smoothly, "have you come to your senses about that nonsense from yesterday?" Margaret's voice was icy. "Gregory, I've seen the evidence. I know what you've done." His facade cracked. "Mother, please, you don't understand." "No." Margaret's voice rang out, filled with a mix of heartbreak and fury. "I trusted you with everything. The foundation, this estate, and you betrayed me. You would have left me with nothing." Gregory's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. "I did it for us. To secure our future. No, Margaret said firmly. You did it for yourself. The fallout was swift. Margaret contacted her lawyers and the authorities, providing them with the evidence Nathan and Malachi had uncovered. Gregory was taken away in handcuffs, his protests echoing through the mansion as he was escorted out. As the door closed behind him, Margaret sank into a chair, her strength seeming to leave her all at once. I failed him, she murmured. I let greed consume him. Malachi knelt beside her, his voice gentle. It's not your fault. He made his own choices. Margaret placed a trembling hand on his cheek. You've shown me what true courage and integrity look like, Malachi. Thank you for saving me, not just my life, but my trust in people. That night, the mansion felt quieter, but not with the heaviness of secrecy. It was a quiet filled with relief, healing, and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, the house felt like a home. The days following Gregory's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional healing. Margaret worked tirelessly with her lawyers to ensure the foundation's funds were returned and safeguarded. Meanwhile, the mansion, once shadowed by deceit, began to fill with a sense of warmth and hope. Malachi found himself adjusting to this new chapter in his life. Margaret insisted he stay at the mansion indefinitely, offering him a room of his own and treating him like family. At first, he was hesitant, uncertain if he truly belonged in such a grand place. But Margaret's unwavering kindness slowly broke through his walls. One morning, as sunlight poured into the kitchen, Margaret and Malachi sat together over breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm toast filled the air. Malachi, Margaret began, her voice gentle, I've been thinking a lot about the future, mine and yours. Malachi looked up from his plate, his brows furrowing slightly. What do you mean? She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You've given me a second chance to do what's right. Gregory's actions hurt a lot of people, and I want to make amends. But I can't do it alone. I'd like you to help me manage the foundation. His eyes widened in shock. Me? I don't know anything about running a foundation. You don't have to know everything right away, Margaret assured him with a smile. You have something far more important, integrity and a kind heart. Those are qualities no amount of training can teach. Malachi hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. I'll try, he said finally, a shy smile creeping onto his face. But only if you promise to guide me. Margaret's laugh was soft and full of affection. It's a deal. Over the next few weeks, Malachi threw himself into learning about the foundation. Nathan, who had been reinstated as Margaret's assistant, became a mentor of sorts, teaching him the ins and outs of managing donations and overseeing community projects. Elena often chimed in with words of encouragement, her no-nonsense demeanor softening whenever she spoke to Malachi. The first project Malachi spearheaded was a program to support underprivileged children in the city, kids like him who needed a chance to prove their worth. He visited shelters and community centers, listening to their stories and finding ways to make a difference. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Malachi stood in a small park watching a group of children play with the new equipment the foundation had donated, he felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of pride. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving, he was building something meaningful. Meanwhile, Margaret took steps to heal her relationship with Gregory, despite his betrayal. She visited him in jail, her love as a mother outweighing her anger. Gregory, she said softly during one visit, her hands clasped tightly on the table between them, you've done terrible things, but you're still my son. I hope you can use this time to reflect and change. Gregory's icy demeanor cracked, revealing a flicker of regret. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he murmured. Perhaps not yet, Margaret replied, her voice firm but kind. But it's never too late to start earning it. Months passed, and the mansion began to transform, not just physically but emotionally. The grand halls were filled with laughter and conversation as Margaret welcomed more guests, donors, beneficiaries, and friends. Malachi often joined her, his confidence growing with each new interaction. One evening, as the first snow of winter fell gently outside, the household gathered in the sitting room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the space. "To new beginnings," Margaret said, raising her teacup in a toast. Her eyes shone with gratitude as she looked at Malachi. "And to the courage that makes them possible." Malachi smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "To family," he said simply, his words met with a chorus of agreement. As the seasons changed, so did Malachi's life. He no longer saw himself as the boy who scavenged for cans in the alleys of Chicago. With Margaret's support, he began attending school again, balancing his studies with his growing role in the foundation. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to grow and give back. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation and hidden truths, became a beacon of hope, a place where second chances were given, and lives were rebuilt. Years later, Malachi stood on the steps of the mansion, now a young man full of purpose. Behind him, children laughed as they ran through the garden during a foundation event. Margaret, now older but no less spirited, sat nearby, watching with a proud smile. "Malachi," Nathan called, walking up the steps to join him. "The next group of donors is ready to meet you." Malachi nodded, his gaze sweeping over the scene before him. This mansion, this life, was a world he had never imagined for himself. Yet here he was, not just living in it but shaping it. As he turned to head inside, he paused, taking one last look at the children playing in the garden. Their laughter echoed through the crisp air, a reminder of how far he had come. With a deep breath, Malachi stepped forward, ready to face the future. The story of Malachi is a testament to the transformative power of courage, kindness, and unwavering integrity. From a boy scavenging for survival in the harsh streets of Chicago to a young leader reshaping lives through compassion and determination, Malachi's journey reminds us that no matter how humble our beginnings, our choices define who we become. This tale sheds light on the enduring importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It shows that acts of bravery, no matter how small, can set off a ripple effect, changing not only our own lives but also the lives of those around us. Through Malachi's unwavering spirit, Margaret's rediscovery of purpose, and even Gregory's eventual path toward redemption, we learn that it's never too late to make things right. Life may challenge us with obstacles and betrayals, but with courage and heart, we can rise above them to create something meaningful. What about you? What do you think is the most important lesson from Malachi's story? If you were in his shoes, how would you have faced Gregory's challenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the incredible potential we all